Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be looking at how decisions the government makes could actually impact your finances.
Hmm.
Like, a kind of impact that might lead to some extra cash in your bank account.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't love to see unexpected deposit?
It's definitely something that gets everybody's attention.
So we're diving deep into some analysis about, what could happen if the government shuts down.
Okay.
And here's the interesting part. Even if a shutdown happens, some payments are required by law to keep going.
It's like the machine of government meets the needs of people, right?
So our source is pretty dramatic. They use words like drama fest and shut her down
Right.
to describe, the budget deadline coming up for the U.S. federal government.
Right.
And they make it clear that if a deal doesn't happen, a shutdown's a real possibility.
And understanding the federal fiscal year is kind of key here.
Yeah.
It starts every October 1st, and ideally, the entire year's budget is approved beforehand. But as our source points out, things don't always go as planned in Washington.
That's for sure. This is where it gets interesting.
Okay.
The source explains that certain types of spending, like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, are categorized as mandatory spending.
Right.
And here's the thing. These programs, they have to be funded, even if everything else stops.
It's fascinating that they use this colorful analogy, like a gold rush. They
Yeah.
talk about shut her down
Right.
to describe a shutdown.
It's like they're trying to add some humor to a serious situation.
Yeah.
Let's bring it back to you. Here's the good news. Your Social Security benefits are considered mandatory spending and are protected by law. So no matter what happens with the budget, those payments should keep coming.
And the source makes it clear that it's not just, a suggestion, it's a legal obligation.
Yeah.
Even during a shutdown, the government is bound by law to continue these payments.
Now, the source does say that the government doesn't always follow the letter of the law, which, raises some questions.
Right. It certainly shows, potential tension between what's required legally and what actually happens.
But for now, rest assured, those Social Security payments should keep coming, even if a shutdown lasts a while. Our source even says a month or 2 or 3 or 5 or 6, whatever, forever to get this point across. Yeah, it really does, show how important those benefits are.
It does. It kind of makes you wonder, what happens if a shutdown does actually happen, What else is affected?
Well, that's where discretionary spending comes in, right?
Right.
Our source explains that it's basically everything else that the government spends money on that's not considered mandatory. Things like, national parks,
Yeah,
certain scientific research, even some defense programs.
exactly. And unlike those mandatory programs, the ones we just talked about,
Right.
discretionary spending, it's vulnerable during a shutdown.
Yeah.
So funding for those programs can be delayed or even completely stopped until a new budget is passed.
So it's like 2 different worlds.
Yeah.
On one side, you got Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, just cruising along,
Right.
protected by law.
Right.
On the other side, you got all these other programs
Yeah.
facing potential disruptions and delays.
That's a really good way to picture it. It highlights the big difference between those two spending categories.
But going back to Social Security, our source really emphasizes that it's not just about the legal stuff, to keep the payments going.
Right.
It's about the role of the program as a safety net for millions of Americans.
Absolutely. It's meant to provide, some basic financial security no matter what's happening in politics. And that peace of mind is really valuable.
The source also brings up a really interesting point, though.
Okay.
If the government is willing to bend the rules, in some cases, what does that mean for mandatory spending in the long run?
That's the question, isn't it? And while our source doesn't really go into all the possible situations, it's something to think about.
Yeah.
If those lines start to get blurry, what could that mean for the future of Social Security?
Makes you think about the big picture, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to assume that these programs are just like set in stone,
Right.
but in reality, they exist in a complicated political world
Yeah.
and a complicated economic world.
Exactly. And understanding that is so important for being informed and, advocating for your own financial well-being.
So even though we know those Social Security checks should keep coming, it reminds us that staying informed and engaged is more important than ever.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to government finances.
Speaking of knowledge, is there anything else in the source that stood out to you, about how a potential shutdown might actually play out?
Well, the source does say that even though, Social Security is mandatory,
Right.
there could still be delays in actually processing payments
Oh,
during a shutdown. And that's because a lot of the government employees who handle all that,
yeah.
they might be furloughed, meaning they're temporarily, out of work.
Wow. So even though the money's there
Right,
and it has to be paid legally,
right.
there's still a chance those checks could be slow getting to people.
That's right. It's not the best situation, but it's a reality.
Yeah.
And the source doesn't really get into, how long these delays might be, but it's something to be aware of.
I guess it just goes to show that, even with the safeguards,
Yeah.
there can still be bumps in the road.
Exactly. And it shows how important it is to have some financial cushion, just in case something like this happens.
So what does all this mean for our listeners? I mean, we've talked about legal protections, possible delays,
Right.
the bigger picture of mandatory spending. Where does all that leave us?
I think the bottom line is that, Social Security benefits are designed to be strong, even if there's a government shutdown. But it's smart to be prepared for potential problems.
It's funny. We started talking about unexpected deposits.
Right.
And while that might not be directly related to a shutdown,
Right.
the idea of having a little extra financial security suddenly feels a lot more important.
I agree. It's always a good idea to have a plan, just in case something unexpected happens, whether it's a shutdown or something else entirely.
Well, I think that's a good place to stop for now. We've covered a lot, from how the federal budget works to how a shutdown could impact Social Security. Before we go, let's get back to our main question, right? What does all this mean for you and your money?
The bottom line is that even if Washington's in a budget fight and everything stops, your Social Security benefits should keep coming. It's like a safety net built into the system.
That is definitely good to hear. But like we talked about, there's always that chance of delays, and the bigger picture of mandatory spending, it's something to watch. You can relax, know your benefits are protected, but
Yeah.
it's still good to know what's going on around them.
Exactly. When you know more, you have more power, right? And the more you get how these complicated systems work, the better you can handle them and fight for your own financial well-being.
It's funny, a topic like government shutdowns can seem so far away and confusing, but then when we really look at it, it can really affect our daily lives.
It shows how everything's connected, and it really highlights why it's important to stay informed and involved, even when it comes to things that seem kind of boring or complicated at first.
Well, on that note, I think we've gotten all the information we can out of this topic. Big thanks to our expert for taking us through this deep dive.
It was my pleasure. Always happy to, help explain these important topics.
And to all of you listening, thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We'll be back soon with another interesting topic to explore. Until then, stay curious.